Okay, another policy, voter opinion of standardized testing. We wanted to measure and understand, is there support for standardized student test scores, primarily being the primarily way to evaluate school and student performance. What we found is, would you prefer a broader set of criteria to evaluate school performance, or do you want to keep it to standardized student test scores? And overwhelmingly, 70% of people would prefer a broader set of standards. And I think this sets up well where, Colorado voters are ready to listen and learn. What ideas do you have for better evaluation? I think the time is really right for perhaps introducing some of those ideas from professional educators, in our state. So,
yeah, I think we're going to be having this conversation. There, as noted on the earlier slide, there's an audit of the state accountability system. I think we're going to see some people really fighting to preserve what they see as objective measures of student achievement, and that's a really important factor to have in our system. And you're going to see a lot of people arguing that that's not the best way to do it. But of course, the big question is, okay, then what? What do you do? And there are a number of school districts that are doing experiments in that still have objectivity and quality control in how they measure it, but take in a broader set of factors. And so it'll be just interesting to see if that gets any traction.
Definitely. Okay. This was another interesting question. Erica, dropped this one in. I thought it was interesting, and it was really trying to answer the question: do COVID policies of candidates for school boards, are they still relevant? Do they still matter? Is that the primary way perhaps a candidate's going to be evaluated? Because it was such a big deal, obviously, in the elections of back in 2021. Feel free to speak to this, Erica.
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it was pretty evenly divided. And yeah, I was curious. We have State Board of Education elections where I think some of the candidates are going to want to talk about COVID response and whether, how you balanced student needs and safety, or whether those things were in conflict. I think we may see ongoing discussion as the pandemic waxes and wanes. In one sense, people were evenly divided. It didn't give me maybe the strong takeaway that I was hoping for. I did think it was a little interesting. I want to make sure I state this correctly. Democrats were more likely to say that it would still matter to them, and Republicans were more likely to say that it was less important. And that was maybe the opposite of what I was expecting, because we did see a lot of, we saw more backlash to COVID restrictions in Republican-leaning suburban areas. But, we'll just have to see, to what extent this comes up or doesn't in the future.
Yeah. And again, hopefully we don't have, another outbreak, if you will, or a really strong surge of another variant this fall and going into the winter. But at the end of the day, we're not that surprised to see among Democratic voters, 56% saying it is still important. And Democratic voters are, put public health and safety, it's a much higher priority for them, where I think Republican voters are really more interested in saying, hey, keep the schools open. There's no reason to shut down and put the brakes on everything. So, but as Erica said, we'll see where we go in the fall. Trust in public groups and organization regarding public education. And again, this is about trust. Please indicate how much trust you have in the following groups to address public education in Colorado: a lot, some, a little bit, or do not trust at all. And so that blue bar is for that organization, a lot and some trust combined. And the orange bar is that, really the no trust at all. Starting to the top, to my surprise, teachers unions, a lot of some trust combined. I'm not saying when we usually poll a local teacher union that they poor poorly or their image rating is not very good. Typically, teachers themselves poll higher than the unions. That's very common knowledge, I believe, for people that follow education. But in this instance, they registered 51%, and 35% said there's no trust at all. Just some other observations. I would point out that both Democrats and Republicans are both upside down. A plurality had no trust in either of those parties compared to the percentage that had a lot or some trust combined. So that's important to see. I thought it was interesting that the Democrat no trust at all number was higher, because traditionally Democrats do, when you ask, which party do you feel has a, would you trust more on the issue of public education, et cetera, Democrats have historically done better, but not in this poll necessarily. So
Yeah, I think this is just an interest. I was surprised by this because in light of all the wrong track responses and the amount of, I think it's fair to say, vitriol directed at teachers unions around COVID restrictions in school, I was just surprised to see that number so high. And yeah, on the demo, and no, I think Dave mostly covered it here. I think it's interesting that the Democrats and the Republicans both have relatively low trust and pretty close to each other, but you see the Democrats with a slightly higher distrust level, if more trust and more distrust. So I guess more people had opinions about
yes,
about Democrats.
Yeah.